Hello and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our July webinar. Today, we're going to talk about empathy in the workplace. Empathy is a very critical HR leadership skill. It helps to build and sustain positive workplace relationships. It helps to foster diversity and inclusion. It also encourages cooperation and collaboration. In addition, it can help to facilitate conflict management. Empathy generates an interest in and appreciation for others by paving the way to more productive working relationships. Today, our webinar is going to provide you with some skills and tools necessary to strengthen your empathy skills. As managers, we need to hone in on our empathetic leadership skills so we can improve leadership effectiveness and to increase our organizational culture. Research shows that 90% of employees believe that empathy is an important workplace value, and 8 in 10 are willing to leave an employer who isn't empathetic. So today we are so excited to have Jeremy York present for us. Jeremy is the Vice President of Talent Strategy and Success and the co-author of the Joy Powered Organization. His expertise is in defining and understanding the big picture, which enables him to translate business needs into tangible solutions. Jeremy has over 20 years of experience in human resource strategy and operations. Jeremy has held various leadership roles and has worked with and advised all levels of management on critical business and people-related issues. We are so excited to have Jeremy present with us today.
Thank you, Misty. I really appreciate it. It is great to be here with everyone today, and thank you for carving some time out of your busy schedules, which I know, to talk about empathy with me today. I was doing a training just on Wednesday. I guess that was yesterday, right, this week. Maybe it was on Tuesday, but we were talking about some, critical management skills, et cetera, in the leadership team meeting. And, one of the persons who were attending the training, they said, empathy. Empathy was one of them. And I was just ecstatic and thrilled that that individual talked about empathy, because it is something that I think as leaders, we don't necessarily think that much about, especially as people managers, right? The importance of empathy and the importance of paying attention to our people in the workplace and ensuring that, one, that we illustrate how valuable they are to us, and two, understanding that empathy is a retention strategy, and thinking about, how difficult it is to find people today to, come in and to work for us. Everyone is struggling to find good, strong people, but yet, are we focused on keeping the people that we do have? That's a great question, something for us to consider. Are we really focusing on keeping the people that we do have that we need? Or are we focused on just filling positions, right? And not necessarily focusing on retention. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and that will drive our conversations throughout. If you do have questions, I do encourage you to put those into the chat. I will be looking and referencing the chat as we go through the presentation today. So feel free to reach out and put those in, and I will try to address them as I can and as I see those. So I want to start off by sharing a simple little quote from our good buddy Teddy Roosevelt. Says that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I'm going to say that one more time just for us to digest that together. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. That was a quote that just sits a certain way with me, where it just hits just right. And the way that we should have a mindset, right, is that, we have a tendency to want to show our value in showing how much we have, how much we know, how good we are at what we do. But first, we don't think about the importance of establishing that relationship about a person, right, and the individual. And so a question that I ask a lot during leadership trainings and leadership development is, who does the work? Who gets the work done at your business, at your organization? A lot of people have a lot of different questions, but we struggle sometimes to get to the answer of people. People do the work. Without people, we can't do the work, right? We're so focused on tasks all the time and getting those tasks done that we don't realize that those tasks cannot be accomplished unless we have people to do so. And we can't have people at work unless we create environments where they feel valued and where they are treated as people and not just some type of number. So I want us to keep that in mind as we go through this today. It's important for us to illustrate and have that relationship. I also like to talk a little bit about the difference between some words that are related to empathy. Some people think they're synonymous, but and those are things like apathy, sympathy, right? And of course, empathy. Well, apathy is when we really have no feeling on the matter, we have no opinion, it doesn't matter to us, we're not involved, right? You talk about someone being apathetic, or they might be feeling apathetic about something, they just don't care, right? Where sympathy is one that we might be a little bit more, I don't know, connected to. It might be more common to us because we use this term a lot, especially when someone dies or passes away, and we tell people, hey, you have my dearest sympathies. And being sympathetic is just really trying to feel together with that person about something, right? We may not feel exactly what they're feeling, but we try to, right? And that's why we say our deepest sympathies, etc. And that's to feel together. Where empathy is really to have more of an emotional investment in that other person's experience and feeling, right? It's where we actually show that care, that concern, that emotional investment in that person about what they're going through, about what they're dealing with, or what they're doing. So here, let me give you a kind of an analogy, if you will. So we're at the lake and we see a person in the middle of the lake drowning, right? Okay, so that's the scenario, that's the situation. An apathetic person says, oh, that person's drowning. That doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm going to go on about my business. Okay, that's the apathetic person. A sympathetic person says, oh my gosh, that person is drowning. She must feel so scared. How bad for her, right? That's being sympathetic. Whereas someone who is showing empathy says, oh my gosh, that person is drowning. That is terrible. What can I do to help her, right? There's an emotional investment in that person, in this particular scenario, that person's safety, right? And that's part of looking at how we treat people, how we build a relationship, and how we look at empathy. So empathy defined is our ability to understand what others are feeling. And some of you who maybe have been through some type of emotional intelligence training or anything, you know that this is kind of the basis of it. But empathy is part of that, part of being able to understand what other people are feeling. And it's that ability to actively share that emotion with that person and passively experiencing the feelings of others, right? So it's we're trying to actively share that emotion with that person, right? And understand where they're coming through and what what they're doing, what they're dealing with. That is what empathy is. And we hear it a lot. We should try to put ourselves in that other person's shoes, right? And that is how we actually try to share that emotion from that standpoint. So I have a question for you, and I want you to use the chat box to be able to answer this question. Do you think empathy is essential in the workplace? I'd like for you to share your responses, answer this question. Do you think empathy is essential in the workplace? And if so, why? Why is it essential? I have lots of people saying yes, definitely 1,000, 100,000%. But why? Why is it essential in the workplace? So take a moment, share your feedback. All right, there we go. We're getting them. So let's look at some of these things here. Yes, it's essential because you connect with people person to person. Absolutely. And we know building relationships with people are as important. Yes, to build strong team relationships, to understand your colleagues better. Yes, absolutely. Empathy is essential so you can connect on a more personal level to understand people. Someone says, without empathy, we lose our humanity, right? We've got someone that says it builds trust. Absolutely. That human connection. It allows us to see employees as humans and not robots. That's a very good one. We need to treat each other like humans that have experiences outside of work as well. It's connections. Oh, here's what Anna says. Absolutely. We spend so much of our lives and time at work. If we don't feel understood, we won't stay. And that is absolutely true. We do spend a tremendous amount of time with people that we're at work with. Liz says it values the person first. Absolutely. We've got yes, because sometimes it helps to understand what the person you're dealing with is going through. Absolutely. These are all great reasons behind empathy. It's essential because it connects you to the employees, especially in their time of need, whatever it may be, right? And that's good. These are all great answers because it all focuses again where it puts the person first, where we see the person as an individual. And that empathy allows us to build that trust and connection, right? Jamie Paul, yes, yes, yes. Jamie wrote, shows we are people, not just a tool used at work. And I love that because sometimes what do we do? How do we treat our people, right? We treat our people as some type of tool to get the work done because we're focused on the task. We're not focused on the individual. We're not focused on what the individual needs from us. And Leslie says, supporting employees from a physical, mental, or emotional perspective is our goal in HR. Sometimes I feel like when we talk about our role in human resources, we forget the human part. We forget that how important it is to really focus on people. And the reality of it is, in the situation where we're at today, we find ourselves at work, is that employees demand to be seen as human beings, right? Not just some type of number, not just some type of machine. We're in a world today where people are bringing everything. And we say we want people to be their authentic selves at work, and we want them to bring their whole selves to work because we understand the value of what that means to the organization through ideation, creativity, innovation, etc. Gone are the days, perhaps, that you may have heard spoken of by maybe your parents or your grandparents, where, you know, when you come to work, you leave home at the door and you don't bring it in with you. You don't bring in your personal life. You don't bring in what's going on. Well, our world is so mixed today, and part of it has been driven by employers, right? That need to the employer to need you outside of normal business hours and to say, hey, we can kind of create flexibility, or we need you to answer to emails outside of work, or you need to be available more often. Employers have kind of demanded that we do that, but as a result, that means we are bringing our baggage, if you will, everything into the workplace, right? We're emotional beings and we have emotions and we have issues that we're dealing with outside of work, right? Our family, our loved ones, we have children, we have aging parents, we have partners, we have spouses, significant others, we have community, we have our family, all of these things that we're trying to balance along with work. As work demands more, it seems as if work is, getting more and more ingrained into our everyday lives, which means we're bringing everything together, right? So people want to interact with the folks that they're working with their managers, with everyone, as human beings, right? Via personality, via feelings, etc. And especially as we see our largest group, millennials, are out there, they want to have meaning and authenticity in the workplace. That means that they don't want to come into work and have to put on some type of veil to shield, who they are, what they do, what they stand for, what's important to them, right? They're bringing that in. And we know that that's important when we're dealing with customers or clients, to have that, that diversity, if you will, as they're coming in. Leadership theory suggests that it's our ability to have and display empathy is a huge part, an important part of leadership in leading people. Because of what our workers and what the world is demanding from us today, as leaders, as people managers, we have to adapt to that and say, we have to focus back on our people. We have to show that empathy. We can't expect someone to be 100% every day, right? We have things that we're dealing with, and we need to be able to understand that. We can't expect people to work like machines. We can't expect that they're going to come in and that they're going to be 100% focused on their work every day. Most days, yes, but some days they're going to have an off day, right? And we also have to look at how we structure the work, right? And how we do the work. Are we treating people like people in the way that we expect them to get the work done? And that's a good question to ask, right? Are we treating them more like production machines and saying, you have to do this or get this done, or we need this done, versus taking into account people's work styles, how they interpret data, how they work with other people, all of those kinds of things, and what they're bringing in, that empathy, that realness at work. When we look at the nature and role and benefits of empathy, we understand that there are many people who don't necessarily have the appropriate traits or behaviors to understand what empathy really is or how it displays. Because we know by understanding others, we can develop close relationships. You all said that in the chat. But what we don't know is that empathy requires three things that are challenging for a lot of people. And those things are listening, openness, and understanding, right? Those are traits that we need to be able to illustrate and demonstrate empathy. Because what it does is that the role that it plays in the workplace is that when we understand our team and we have a better idea of what lies ahead of us, when we understand our people, we can kind of anticipate challenges, right? When we understand what our people go through and what they're dealing with, we can be able to plan the work better. We can align the work with the right people, etc. We can be able to, shift work as we need to if, someone is going through something on the team that is going to, put them at a disadvantage or take them out of something, right? But why aren't we being more empathetic at work to these kinds of things? Why are we still focused on those tasks and getting the work done and not necessarily so much from the people? Well, that's because empathy takes work from a different perspective. It takes the work and it challenges us to move our focus away from ourselves, right? Because as people managers and leaders, we have a tendency to say, okay, we're responsible for the work getting done, for the tasks being accomplished, for the deadlines being met. That is what is important. That is what people are recognizing us for. But what we aren't focused on is really on how do we inspire, how do we motivate, how do we empower, how do we encourage the people that are on our team to get those results that we need, right? That is where we have to shift that focus on being able to ensure that our team feels supported, they have what they need from us, they feel trusted, they feel respected, they feel as if that they are included, all of those things that are out there to be able to get the work done, right? That's where we have to make that paradigm shift. That's where we have to move the way of traditional thinking into more of a people-focused environment. So what's interesting is that when we look at empathy in the workplace and how it plays out, it's like, here are some statistics for us of the importance of empathy and why we need to have this as a focus. Is that a lack of empathy could lead to higher employee turnover. And here's why. Because 72% of employees would consider leaving their current company if they displayed less empathy. So we know that empathy is important. If they're displaying less, people are probably going to leave. That's why we should display more. 92% of employees reported that they would be more likely to stay with the company if they empathize with their needs. Now, take a look at that. 92% of employees said they would stick around if the employee empathized with their needs. And that's being able to build that relationship, make that connection, treat them as a human being, and understand what their needs are. I had a question that came up. It says, as a manager, how can I best balance empathy with performance expectations when an employee continues to be distracted by their personal life and not addressed with performance issues after not addressing the performance issues after multiple coaching meetings over the course of the year? Well, that's a great question. A lot of people ask, how do I get this nice balance of empathy, right? How do we manage, empathy, in this kind of scenario, in this kind of situation? Well, the answer is that empathy is no more than building relationships and trying to understand where your employees are coming from. Now, that doesn't mean that gives a pass to poor performance. It doesn't mean that we allow our people to take advantage of us. That doesn't mean we turn the other cheek when an employee has already had multiple opportunities to improve, et cetera. We still have to do our jobs and manage that. So I'm not saying that we should let everything slide and just, focus on the employee and let them do whatever they want. That is not what we're talking about here. It's more about building that relationship and building the trust and having that and being able to show the employees that you care, but having at the same time the ability to hold them accountable for their work. Yes, we know that employees will go through situations that might impact their work, right? But that should only happen maybe once a year, maybe twice a year or something. An employee that is having a meltdown or a crisis every week, that is problematic. It's not as if you still got to get the work done. We're just looking at how we get it done through people. But if the people aren't capable of getting it done, even with you being able to help support them and showing empathy, then that's not an excuse to continue to, keep them around from that standpoint and not address the performance issue. So I just want to make sure that that's very clear, is that we want to create empathy, we want to experience that, but if it's a pattern of behavior, a recurring pattern of behavior where there is a crisis with the employee all the time, that's a problem, right? As opposed to an employee who is great, but maybe they're going through a divorce and they need a little grace, or maybe they're having issues with their kids and they need a little grace. That's a whole different kind of concept from that standpoint. So I hope I've answered your question appropriately with all of that. So let's look at some more data of empathy in the workplace. 85% of employees agree that empathy is often undervalued by their employer. Many times employees just want to be heard. They just want you to understand where they're coming from. But we've all had that manager, and we all know that manager that could really care less what you're going through and says, well, that's what's going on at home, but at here you need to be focused on this. That's not realistic any longer. That's not the reality. When we talk about all of the mental health issues that people are dealing with today in the world that we're living in, we're exposed to more information, more good, bad, and the ugly, all of the time, which impacts our mental health and the way that we're dealing with things. We just came off of a global pandemic, right? And we're still dealing with the aftermath from that. So we have to realize that, a little bit of empathy and a little bit of grace goes a long way. 60% of employees would be willing to take less pay if their employer showed empathy. You want to talk about a retention tactic. 60% of employees would be willing to take less pay if their employer showed empathy. And 51% of employees feel that organizations are not sympathetic. If somehow we could get a grasp of this empathy component in the way that we lead our people and how we look at it, look how it would impact the organization, right? 60% of employees would be willing to take less pay if the employer empathized with them. 85% thinks their employer is undervalued. I mean, all of these things are connected to an employee's happiness with the organization, their connectivity. The part that an employer can recognize that an employee has more than a work life. And I want to say that one more time, that an employee has more than a work life. they have a family life. This is why we saw the Great Resignation. So many people at this point in time had these workplace epiphanies about the value of life and the value of their families and the value of existence. People who didn't really like their jobs all that well, who were giving 100% and now saying, you know what, life is too short. This isn't what I want. In the world of gig economies, in the world of contract work, people starting their own businesses, these are all things that people did because that they weren't feeling the love from their employer. They weren't feeling important. They weren't feeling valued as a person. The research tells us that companies that are empathetic outperform their counterparts by 20%. And we can see that based on the employee data we just looked at and reviewed, right? That employees, who are feeling valued by their organization and that feel like their employer is empathizing with them, it impacts, their morale. It builds trust, as we said. It helps retain clients. It bolsters employee engagement because there's now a connection between, the organization. There's a connection between the manager. There's a connection between their coworkers, right? That keeps them there. There's this part of helping people eliminating disbelief and this gossip. They begin to buy in what the organization is telling them, and it reduces fear of not being safe, and not just physically safe, but a psychological safety, right? That there's okay for them to talk about and share, hey, I have a life outside of this. I have other things going on. I can't be, working 50, 60 hours a week and giving up my family just because that's what you think that I should be doing from that standpoint, right? I know work has to get done. Don't get me wrong, I understand that. But at the same time, can we really expect our employees to give up parts of their lives that are important to them, or to look past that, or put that on hold, or not to deal with some of the challenges that they have? That's the importance of empathy. Now, one thing that you all said in your feedback when I asked you about why empathy is important in the workplace, and we see it here in this Harvard Business Review, is that it talks about building trust. Let me ask you this question. I want you to take to the chat box. Why is trust important at work? Why is trust important? I want to hear your comments. Take to the chat box here. Why is trust important at work? A little harder question. Nothing yet. Here we go. To maintain strong relationship with your colleagues, enhance congruency, so you can get the real story and make real change. Justine, that is great. I love that. Absolutely. Because it creates this sense of transparency where I can be transparent and I can share that. Where you can expect the other person will have my best interest in mind. Exactly. Alexandra, that is the root of trust. That is how trust is established. Alexa said it's the foundation for productive, positive performance. That's because when we trust people, and we have trust as the basic foundation, and at the root of trust is that we believe that that other person that we trust has our best interest in mind, that helps us be much more committed. It helps us build better relationships. It has stronger impact on human interaction, right? And it's all of those connected types of things that we deal with. And that's what's important. I love this. Jetta says, you don't feel like you're constantly looking over your shoulder or that your position is in jeopardy. Leslie says, trust allows vulnerability, which is helpful to have honest conversations about how we can support one another. Absolutely. And that vulnerability is important. And that's why that empathy comes into play from that standpoint, right? To have that vulnerability and that trust. Trust is so important in everything that we do. If we're not trustworthy, then we're not able to be really open and honest and upfront, right? We don't have trust. It can be a roadblock to our empathy. Absolutely. Liz said, trust is huge for the person, but also for the organization because it provides organizational results as more time being productive when trust and people work together. Absolutely. It builds that bond. But here's a lot of reasons why that trust can't be established, or a lot of reasons why we can't show that empathy or demonstrate that empathy. And part of it is within our control, some of it is subconscious. There's a lot of different things that play into this factor. Well, one of them is feeling the pressure. So when we are under pressure, we have a hard time distinguishing between our own emotional state and the emotional state of the other person, right? So when that person is emotional and being emotional with us, and we should be stopping to show and to listen and demonstrate empathy about what's going on, we aren't. We're thinking about our own emotional state, how I'm feeling right now. Okay, that person's emotional, but you know what? I am too. By golly, I'm emotional too. I got things going on, and I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about me instead of thinking about that person in the moment while we're dealing with that pressure, right? That doesn't allow us to be able to differentiate and see that empathy. Emotions are also contagious. So in that same context, when we become agitated because someone else is emotional or they're going through something and they're projecting it a little bit at us, we're more likely to react to that agitation with similar emotions, right? When someone comes to you and they're kind of angry or something's going on, you have a tendency to immediately become defensive, and a lot of times as if it's a personal attack. Instead of taking a moment and saying, this is what this person is feeling right now. I need to seek to understand. I need to listen. Why are they feeling this way, right? Before I stop to show any emotions. Something that I've learned that I've practiced over the years that have really helped me, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect because I'm not, none of us are, but something that has really helped me is that I think we all feel that emotion coming on when we're in these kinds of situations, right? I think there is a way that we can feel it. And we kind of have to stop and ask ourselves. I always say do a emotion check where we say, okay, just because I'm feeling this emotion right now, does that mean that I should be feeling it, right? That I should be feeling that kind of emotion. And sometimes we have to check that. And that's the thing, is that we have to check ourselves and focus on that individual and understand that we need to seek to understand where they're coming through and what they're dealing with, and understand, because it might not even be about us, right? But we begin to take it that way because that's one way, maybe that's the only way they know how to communicate how they're feeling, because they are emotional. We're emotional beings. We also understand that snap decisions encourage projection. So when we make decisions that are under pressure, they make us to really be less likely to accurately understand what we're dealing with and begin to project our own emotions into the decision makings and others, right? If we stop and focus on the facts and not the person that we're dealing with, that will help us. Focus on the facts of the situation, not the individual, right? And that will help us to be able to make sure that we're making the right decisions. Because a lot of times we all know when we make decisions while under pressure, we don't actually think about them a lot of time, and it just is an instinct, and it's not always the right thing, right? To make those snap decisions. We also know that it's a lot harder for us to empathize with someone we don't know versus someone we do know. And that's why it's important to establish those relationships and build relationships with people that you are connected to, right? Because if we don't know that person, there's no investment, right? So it's easy for us to be totally removed, be apathetic instead of empathetic when it's more of a stranger or something that's going on that. And then last but not least, we have defensiveness, right? I already brought that up, and it's a self-protection kind of thing, right? And it's easy for us to take those things personally and make it all about us instead of empathize with that person who's suffering. And maybe the reason that they're acting out at that moment, or they're sharing what's going on, or their work is impacted, it's not about us. It's because they don't really know how to process those kinds of emotions or what they're feeling, or those types of things, right? But here is the great thing to understand is that empathy can be learned. We have the ability to be able to learn how to be more empathetic. And I know there was a question about empathy on a more individual versus organizational level, and we're going to show that. And we're going to talk through some of that. But we first have to understand that empathy starts with the individual. It has to start with the individual first before we can make it organizational, right? And we have to look at how we make that part of the organization. So empathy really puts us in someone else's shoes versus sympathy, right? Where when we sympathize with someone, we're trying to feel with them, but that empathy again is that emotional investment, right? And we have to understand and know when to use one approach versus the other, where we know when we need to sympathize with someone versus when we need to empathize with them, right? We have to pay attention to what the person is communicating to us and understand what that is, because there are situations that require empathy where other situations just require us to illustrate sympathy. We also have to make sure that we connect with other people by being a good listener. And part of that is that whole seek to understand mentality is that we have to be a good listener and asking questions about what the other person is feeling, right? Helping them be honest, you being honest, being vulnerable, mirroring any positive nonverbal communication to help them in the situation. But it's really showing, number one, I care about you. And number two, I really want to understand where you're coming from so that we can work through this together and I can support you. But notice I didn't say solve your problem, because it's not my responsibility in this situation to solve the problem, but it is my responsibility to understand and listen and try to put myself in their shoes to see where they're coming from, right? That's what we do. We also have to develop those good relationships with people, especially people who are not like us, that might have different backgrounds, might have different cultures, um, you know, people that we aren't as familiar with, where we need to take the time to build those relationships, right? And understand that. And we have to make sure that they know that we care about them as well, that they're respected, that they're valued just like everyone else is. Maybe because they might look a little different or their background is different, or they're not as familiar with the things that other people are, whatever it might be. We have to make sure that they feel included, right? And that they are respected and that we value from them from that standpoint. When I say empathy really starts with us, it does. It starts on that individual level because we make a decision to be empathetic or not. We consciously, and a lot of people don't like it when I say that, but we consciously make that decision, right? We consciously determine how we respond. We're in control of ourselves. So it's up to us to determine if we want to illustrate that empathy. It's up to us if we want to learn how to be more empathetic and what that really means for us. So we have to start there. We have to start because we make the change. We begin to make the change in the organization when we want to show that empathy is important, right? It starts with us. This is all about people. This is about a people change. So when we think about going into like the organization as the next step, we have to understand that we have to teach an organization on how to be empathetic, right? Organization is made up of people, not just processes, right? People do the work, they do the tasks. We have to teach people the importance of empathy. And for the organization to become empathetic, we have to begin to teach the people within the organization that empathy is important and what that is, and make that part of our values. Now, yes, that does mean it does have to come from the top to say, do we want to be an empathetic organization? We have to be able to support that. But it's the people within the organization teaching empathy, talking about empathy, encouraging people to have, perspectives and to take a perspective and share that on something in a safe environment. And being able to cultivate compassion about, hey, we understand life is tough, things tough, the world is challenging, there's so much going on, people are overwhelmed, and we have to respect that. Those are the things that we do within the organization. Those are things we have to take, steps we have to take. So number one, we have to begin to let managers know that empathy matters, that it's part of that, right? We have to teach that by giving time and attention to our people, that it enhances their performance and improves their effectiveness. Yeah. I hear people say that all the time, Jeremy. That's what I hear, right? Or, how are we supposed to have time for this? And I say back to them, how do you have time to be a good human being? People don't really like it when I challenge them with that question either, right? How do you have time to be a good human being? We work at it. We make it part of who we are, right? And we begin to put into place those things on how we approach situations, how we work with people from that standpoint. So we have to teach people the importance of that empathy in the beginning time and attention and the impact that it has on the organization. We have to embody empathy in our culture as an organization. And we have to make this an expectation in interaction with others. I let people know that, yay, if you really want to be an empathetic organization, you need to hold your people accountable for illustrating and demonstrating empathy. People say, oh, okay, well, how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, we make it part of our core values, and we make it part of our performance that we measure for our people and our leaders. Do we show empathy to others? Do we pay attention to what others' needs are? Are we attentive to that? Do we show genuine care and concern for our coworkers, for our direct reports, whatever it may be? We can make that part of our performance statements, right? And we can use benchmark assessments to set specific measures to help us improve, our empathy and managers' capacity for empathy, right? And we can take that through employee engagement or employee climate surveys of being asked about how people feel about management, leadership, their organization, if we're empathetic, all of those types of things. And we can start a measure. Then we can put things into place. And then when we survey again, we can say, how far did we push that needle? How far did that ball get pushed forward? What does that look like? But we have to begin to talk about it. If we don't talk about empathy, it means it doesn't exist. So we have to make that part of our everyday organizational, vernacular. We also have to teach listening skills. And we know that not everyone's a good listener, and it doesn't come naturally to people, but people can learn some skills on how to be a good listener, right? We have to listen to people in order to help them know that they're important and that they can, trust us and that we care and that they're respected. We have to listen to hear the meaning behind what other people say. Not just listening to us to say, okay, what am I going to say next? But again, going back to seek to understand, listening to understand the meaning. What are they really telling me? What are they really saying? Pay attention to nonverbal cues. Be an active listener. Use active listening techniques. Restate what you think that you've heard. Acknowledge what you've heard. There is such a huge difference between hearing and listening. We all know that. You probably have a good example of that using it with your spouse, your significant other, or your partner, or even your kids, right? Listening versus hearing. You're two different things. But by teaching those listening skills, it really lets people know that we are in the moment with them and we're emotionally invested with them in that moment and ready to show that empathy, if that is what we need to do at the moment, but really showing that we care. Making sure that we're able to reflect the feelings that person is expressed to us, and how we are able to say, this is what I hear you saying. Here's what I hear you say that you're feeling. And I want to support you with all of that. We teach those listening skills to our folks. We encourage people to take a perspective, to take a stand, to share what their points of view are, right? We can never understand someone unless we understand their point of view. Just because we disagree with their point of view doesn't mean we shouldn't try to understand it, because it might change the way that we think. And, to be honest with you, I love it when I have a preconceived notion or I think I have a stand on something and I listen to someone else and they change my mind. I love that, or they get me to think differently about it, because that's how we grow. That's how we get better. That is how we continue to improve and develop, right? We have to consider that personal experience that person's had, right? Because we may not have had that. So we can't speak to it, but they can. And they can give us a really good bird's eye perspective of whatever that situation is or what they're going through and dealing with. right? And this helps us be able to solve problems, manage conflict, drive innovation, and how we run our organizations and what we do. When people feel that connection and they have that ability to be valued as an individual and as a human being, they're there to be able to give you great insight to things that we need to know to be more innovative, to meet our clients' needs, to solve problems, to be more efficient, to be more effective. But if they don't feel that, they're not going to provide that to us. They're not going to share that with us. Last but not least, we also have to cultivate compassion. And this just goes beyond just our value statement and saying we care about our employees. How many of you have seen that? And where organizations have a statement about we care about our employees, this, that, and the other, but actions speak louder than words. Where our actions internally and how we operate the organization doesn't align with our verbiage that we're putting out there, or what we're saying, right? So we've got to make sure that we're communicating openly, honestly, that we're clear to other people, that we're illustrating vulnerability, that we provide continuous support, we cheer people on, we celebrate the successes, and we show compassion, to them, not just verbally, but in the way that we approach the work and the way that we support them overall, where we're aware of the emotions and thoughts that other people are having, right? A lot of times I see managers think, oh yeah, my department's going along just fine. We're good, blah, 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 blah. But you ask the employees and they're like, we're struggling here. We're barely keeping our heads above water. We're trying to meet all these expectations and it just doesn't work. And we feel terrible, right, about how we're doing our jobs, because there's such a disconnect between that, because we're not seeking people and saying, how are things going? Are things working well? What are you struggling with? What can I do to better support you? And really being open to that, right? And that's the vulnerability. We have to understand our words affect others, but not just our words, but also our actions. So in order for us to really look at how we build this in the organization and we make that change internally, we need to organize empathy training, right? And let people know what it is, right? And have people understand what that really means to them. It is more than just, oh, a pat on the back, feel good. What is empathy truly? I would guess that most people have no clue what the real definition of empathy is and what it means to illustrate or display empathy, right? And if we start to train and teach people about that, it will help them gain that greater understanding, just the same way that all of you here today are, as we are diving down, taking a deep dive into this empathy component of what that looks like. We also have to look at making sure that as we organize this empathy training, that we reward empathy. Okay, so we're training our people about it, what it is, but now we have to be able to reward it when people demonstrate, right? And we want to encourage a certain behavior. What do? We reward it. It's Pavlov's dog, right? It's that whole concept where we acknowledge employees when we see them doing a good job of asking questions and listening and showing empathy. When we talk about it, where we make public announcements and reference how we're doing with our team and empathy skills and what that looks like and how that is important for us from that standpoint. We don't recognize it, it's not going to be seen as an important behavior. If we don't talk about it, it's not going to be seen as an important behavior. It's something that we want to make part of who we are as we continue to want to demonstrate this. As I say, if we continue to want to make empathy a retention strategy, we have to have action, just like any other strategy we might want, right? I've always found that's interesting when we're looking at strategies from a business perspective. Our strategies are typically focused on our tasks and not necessarily our people. Think about that for yourself. When you've built a strategy for something, it's focused on the task, right? On how we make that task more efficient. How do we get more for our money? How do we do this? As opposed to, how do we develop our people more to do that? How do we develop our workforce and create feelings for them that make us a choice employer so that it impacts the tasks that we need to do? So I think that's important for us to look at. Just had a comment that said another important ad is how important it is to be an active listener and not multitasking during a conversation. Giving someone your full attention means a great deal and shows compassion and respect. That is amazing. Thanks, Sherry, for sharing that. Because I usually share this example when we're talking about giving people your full attention and really paying it, um, paying forward what it is you want to have, right, from them. Think about it. You're in your office, when we're all working together, employee comes in, needs to talk to you about something, etc. You're at your desk, at your computer, and what happens? The employee comes in and says, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" And you are looking at your computer and you continue to type. You're like, "Yeah, what's up?" And you continue to type. You continue to work on what you're doing, right? And you're multitasking, wanting them just to tell you what it is while you complete what it is you're doing or continue to work. When we really should stop what we're doing, turn our whole body to face that person and say, absolutely, what is it? What can I do for you? One of my first bosses I ever had, I learned that from her. She was excellent at being able to do that. And I didn't really know a whole lot at the time what it meant, being new and still learning in my first job. But she always made a point to, no matter what it was, to stop and turn and give you her full attention. And she was one of the best mentors I had, and we had a great relationship. And it was because of things like that, and the trust and the transparency and the vulnerability, the ability to be able to admit when we're wrong, all of those things, right, really made the difference in working with her and her being a great example. But that meant so much to me when she said, "You're what's important right now. Let me listen to what you have to say." So Sherry, thanks for bringing that up. And that is something that has always been there for me, and I always try to do myself. Even as busy as we are today, and we're trying to manage these multiple tasks, we always need to be able to think about that, how we focus on that individual person. We also have to look at how we go about our hiring process. And a lot of people think, okay, well, this is a weird or obscure slide to have in this deck. Well, really, it's about tweaking the hiring process and saying, if we say empathy is so important for us and our employees or our managers and our leaders, then maybe we need to start identifying that quality in the interviewing process, right? And be intentional about screening for empathy, being intentional about screening for empathy for those people that we're looking to bring on to the organization. So maybe we need to look at creating, new interview questions, those behavioral-based interview questions, to encourage applicants to show how they've practiced empathy or how they've given empathy in the past or displayed empathy in the past. Make sure that they provide us with those examples, just like we would in any other behavior-based interview question that might outline from their previous work experience and what that might mean to them, right? It's not that I'm interested in how you would go about displaying empathy. I'm more interested in understanding, how did you illustrate or display empathy in a situation from that. That will tell you a lot about the individual, the way they answer that question, and how they might fit into your organization if you're trying to really promote and push empathy from that perspective. So we've got about 7 minutes left, and I always want to be cognizant of everyone's time from that. And so we've had a long journey today. I feel like, we've talked about just kind of the numbers and the stats of empathy, what it is, why it's important to the organization, who has to make the change, which it starts with us on an individual level, then to bring it up into the organization and how we do that. So we've had a long journey. But it's a well worthwhile journey when we're thinking about the importance of our people, and the importance of people staying with us and with retaining our people. I think the ship has sailed on that day many moons ago, where we used to say, if someone's not working out, just get rid of them, we'll find somebody else to do the job. It's not that easy anymore. That ship has sailed for us. We don't have as many people out there to choose from. A lot of the people we're choosing from aren't necessarily people that align with us very well. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to focus on the people that we do have and realize and figure out, how do we keep them? How do we grow them internally? how do we want them to be a part of this organization? So my challenge and question for you really is, what can you do, you individually, what can you do to affect empathy in your organization? What's something that you can start doing? Maybe it's just, hey, Jeremy, I just need to start talking about the importance of empathy, of what that means, what people want. People are tired of being treated like numbers, of being treated like robots, or being treated like their outside lives that exists outside of the workplace isn't important, right? That we need to understand what is important to them. And maybe that's it. Maybe we need to start talking about that. Who knows? But it's being able to have that conversation of talking about it, And thank you for those of you who are throwing in what you can do into the chat boxes. I love that. Being able to model it, right? I will be vulnerable with all of you right now, is that empathy isn't something that comes very easy for me, right? It's something I've had to work on over the years. I remember when we first did, the Clifton Strengths Finder, and empathy was very low on my list with all of that. And, my first boss said, hey, you know what? Empathy is something that you probably should maybe focus more on as you develop yourself as a leader. And I've taken that to heart because it's important, to me. And it's something we have to work on. And we're not perfect all the time, but it is something we have to be cognizant about. And we also have to be intentional about from that standpoint. So I think those are important things. So we've started to have a few questions that have come into the chat box. So feel free to throw those in. We've got about 3 minutes left. I can answer a few questions, and then Misty is going to wrap us up and give you your information that you need for certification, etc. But Sandra has a couple questions. She said, organizational challenges take a while to see the change. How long do you see this change occur? So I'm thinking, how long does it take really? Number one, yes, it is a challenge. How long does it take for this change to occur? Well, it depends on a few things. I mean, it's a slow moving kind of component, but we can expedite it if we're committed and we put the right kinds of goals in place and the right kinds of strategies in place on how we're going to do this, right? I think if anything is important to an organization, they can make it happen a lot quicker, but it's all about how quickly they want to, make that change in the organization. I've seen organizations go through 90-day transformations, right? So probably not a good answer to your question, or the question, or the answer that you would like on that, Sandra. But it really just depends on the organization, how committed we are, and what strategy is that we want to put up there and actually execute from that standpoint, from everything. So, Leslie, you put a nice comment in, and I really like this. And Leslie said, lead by example, actions speak louder than words. For example, use a sick day as a self-care day if your mental health is in a bad state, to show others that it's okay to be encouraged and to do so. So many times we equate health as being a physical illness. I love this. Model it. Be transparent. So you know what, everybody? I need a mental health day, so I'm going to be taking next Friday off as a sick day, just to have it be from mental health or whatever. Let people know that you're doing that. Normalize that it's okay to take a mental health day from that. Normalize that. So, all right, Misty, I'm going to kick it back over to you so you can close this out and give everybody the information they've really been waiting for.
Wonderful. Thank you for such a great presentation today, Jeremy. And thanks to all of you who attended and shared your comments and thoughts. We definitely appreciate that. Please, if you're not already connected with us, follow us on social media. We are on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. You can find a lot of information that we share about our upcoming events, and just some nice tools and tidbits of information to stay up to date on everything HR. Next slide, please. Here is your SHRM credit. So this has been approved for one SHRM PDC. So if you would like to take a screenshot of that, I also dropped it in the chat for you. You can record that for your SHRM credits. Next slide, please. We are not going to host a webinar next month, as we are going to be at the HR Indiana conference. So please join us. We are going to be speaking. So we have a couple speaking events that we'll be hosting there, as well as a booth. So please come by and visit us at HR Indiana. Next slide, please. Also, really excited to announce that we have our upcoming training series, which is Joy Powered Leadership. And this series will kick off on September the 8th. So if you're interested right now, we have a buy one, get one. If you're interested in more information, you can find it on our website, or you can email Misty at purpleinkllc.com. Our buy one, get one expires on August 1st. So if this is something that you're thinking about, I would get signed up right away. Again, that's a virtual training series, 6 sessions, and it will be all virtual. Here is our survey. If you can please give us some feedback, tell us about some topics that you would like. We're always looking for ways that we can improve. I also put the link in the chat, so you can just click on that and give us some feedback. Again, we will not host a webinar next month. You can join us in September with Jody Curtis. She is going to talk about strengths-focused leadership. We thank you all so very much for attending.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate your time today. It was so good to have all of you. And so we'll see you in September.
Thank you.